The glass shattered against the hardwood floor, a crystalline scream that echoed through the penthouse. My hand trembled, red wine pooling like blood around the jagged shards. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, her briefcase still clutched in one hand, her eyes wide with a horror that mirrored my own. The email on my laptop glowed accusingly from the desk, its words burned into my retinas. "I know what you did, David. She deserves to know." My wife's gaze flicked to the screen, and in that fractured second, I knew the life we'd built was crumbling. The air in our Manhattan apartment felt thick, heavy with the scent of her jasmine perfume and the metallic tang of my fear. 20 years of marriage, 2 decades of shared dreams, now teetered on the edge of a single damning truth. I wanted to speak, to explain, but my throat was a desert, my tongue a traitor. Emily's voice, when it came, was a low, trembling blade. "David, what is this?" I forced myself to meet her eyes, those hazel pools I'd fallen into on our first date at that cramped Brooklyn cafe. Back then, she'd laughed at my terrible puns, her smile brighter than the neon signs outside. Now her lips were a tight line, her face pale as the city lights flickering through our floor-to-ceiling windows. "It's not what you think," I stammered, the lie tasting bitter even as it left my mouth. Her eyes narrowed, and I saw the lawyer in her awaken. The same ruthless intellect that had just secured her firm an $80 million deal. She dropped her briefcase with a thud and crossed the room, her heels clicking like a metronome counting down to judgment. "Don't," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Don't lie to me. Not now." She leaned over the desk, her fingers hovering above the laptop as if touching it might burn her. The email was anonymous, a coward's weapon, but its words were precise, surgical. Ask him about the nights he spent with Laura at the Regency. Ask him why he transferred $50,000 to her account. My heart slammed against my ribs, a caged animal desperate to escape. Laura. The name was a grenade, and the pin had just been pulled. I'd met her 6 months ago, a consultant hired to streamline my company's operations. She was sharp, charismatic, with a laugh that made late-night meetings feel less like work and more like something else. I hadn't meant for it to happen. A drink after a long day, a shared cab, a moment of weakness in a hotel bar. But one night became 2, then a blurred cascade of stolen moments, each one a brick in the wall of my betrayal. "Emily, My voice cracked, and I hated how small it sounded. She didn't look at me, her eyes locked on the screen, scanning the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. I wanted to tell her it wasn't love, that Laura meant nothing, that it was a mistake born of stress and ego and a fleeting need to feel alive. But the truth was uglier. I'd chosen those moments, savored them, even as I lied to myself that I could keep them separate from the life I cherished. $50,000? Emily's voice was a whisper now, but it carried the weight of a scream. "You gave her money?" She turned to me, and the betrayal in her eyes was a physical force, pinning me to the wall. I wanted to explain. The money wasn't a gift, it was a desperate attempt to buy Laura's silence after she'd threatened to tell Emily everything. But how could I say that without admitting the affair? How could I confess that I'd paid to protect a lie, only to have it explode in my face? I was trying to fix it. I said, the words clumsy, inadequate. "I didn't want to hurt you." Her laugh was a jagged thing, sharp and broken. "Fix it," she repeated, stepping closer, her breath hot against my face. "You think throwing money at your mistress fixes this? You think lying to me for months fixes this?" Her voice rose, each word a lash, and I flinched, not from her volume but from the raw pain beneath it. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in as the city's hum droned outside. Taxis honking, distant sirens, the pulse of a world that didn't care about our unraveling. I remembered the early days, when Emily and I would stay up late, plotting our futures over cheap wine and takeout. She'd been a junior associate then, scrappy and ambitious, while I was building my tech startup from a dingy co-working space. We'd promised each other honesty always. How had I let that promise decay? "Tell me everything," she said, her voice steady now, a prosecutor demanding the truth. I sank onto the couch, my legs unsteady, and the story spilled out in fragments. Late nights at the office, Laura's flirtations, my own weakness. I told her about the hotel, the guilt that gnawed at me every time I came home to her smile. The panic when Laura demanded more than I could give. Emily listened, her face a mask, but her hands trembled, betraying the storm inside. When I finished, the silence was suffocating. She stood by the window, her silhouette framed against the glittering skyline, and I wondered if she was imagining a life without me. I trusted you, she said finally, her voice so soft I barely heard it. I built my entire world around you and you, she trailed off, her shoulders shaking. I wanted to cross the room, to hold her, but the distance between us felt like a chasm. Then she turned, and her eyes held something new. Not just pain, but resolve. I got the deal today, she said, almost to herself. $80 million. I was going to come home and celebrate with you. Her voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. But you were celebrating with her, weren't you? No, I said too quickly, desperate to claw back some piece of her trust. It's over, Emily. I ended it. I swear. But even as I spoke, I saw the doubt in her eyes, the realization that my words were just another layer of deception. She didn't know about the final twist, the one I'd discovered only hours before the email arrived. Laura had been working with a competitor, feeding them my company's secrets. The $50,000 wasn't just hush money, it was her price for betrayal, a betrayal that mirrored my own. I opened my mouth to tell her, to confess that my mistake had cost not just our marriage but my company, my legacy. But before I could, she spoke, her voice cold and final. I'm filing for divorce, David. The words hit like a physical blow, stealing my breath. She picked up her briefcase, her movements deliberate, and walked toward the door. You'll hear from my lawyer. The door closed with a soft click, a sound more final than any scream. I stood alone in the wreckage of our life, the laptop still glowing, the wine still pooling on the floor. And in that moment, I realized the true cost of my secrets. Not just the loss of Emily, but the loss of the man I thought I was.